Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. Join me today as I turn this and this into this, a Gothic hanging basket. Hello, I am your everyday average Jonathan. I'm an ordinary guy with ordinary tools making extraordinary items. I'm a self-taught craftsman. I'm an amateur blacksmith and a novice woodworker. I own your most basic set of tools that I've cobbled together over the years. Each week I take on a new build project. I show you my process, I show you my perspective. I don't edit out any of my mistakes. I don't edit out any of my aha moments. My goal is simple, is to demonstrate that really anybody can be self-taught. Anybody can take on fantastical projects, things that you might have thought that were out of reach for you, maybe too difficult or too fantastical. The items that I make each week tend to be fantastical, whimsical, novelties, curios, weapons and armors. And this week we'll actually highlight that. I was going to build a lantern, as I said in my last video, but then I saw something on the internet. So what I'll be making this week is going to be a Gothic hanging basket for either a plant or some sort of decoration. But in my mind's eye, this basket would be perfect to suspend a bunch of small logs to light a fire with, to light your castle with. It should be a fairly quick build. It's certainly going to be fascinating. So without further ado, let's get to the shop and get started. All right, full transparency. I saw an image on one of my internet feeds of basically a spiked chain hanging basket. I loved it. I thought it was really, really cool looking. I'm basically going to make what I saw, but with a whole bunch of my own revisions or edits or additions, if you will. The spike chain is what really caught my eye. But I'm going to do a few other things that are going to make it my own. I'm not just going to copy the image that I saw. The bracket that I'm going to hang this from is going to be kind of a Frankenstein of ornate pieces of metal that I've cobbled together and some that I'm going to end up twisting. So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to make this chain by hand. And I've made chains before and they always turn out really, really poorly. So I thought I would heat up this stock iron. It's 3/8 inch stock iron. Actually, I think it's a 1/4 inch stock iron, and wrapped it around this big post. And boy, did that not turn out the way that I thought I was going to. It was very, and also the way I clamped my post to that table up didn't turn out the way that I thought I was going to. But really, these rings were not very round. They were sort of amoeba-esque, so there's going to have to be a lot of correction. And honestly, I don't know enough about how to make a chain to see, is this just the way you do it? Do you get the rings formed and then weld them together? And there's a lot of questions I have, and I should probably ask a really good blacksmith what the best way to do it is. I did think this turned out pretty well. Just line them all up and weld them together. But then, to get the rings the shape that I wanted to, I first needed to get them as round as I possibly could. I did clean up the welds a teensy bit, but I will say on this project in general, I actually made a policy with myself that I was not going to clean up any of these welds. So once I got these rings round and welded, I could then elongate them because they were going to be long ovals, as you see here, with spikes in the middle. I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but it's the way that I chose to do it, and it turned out fine. Very, very rough ovular rings. Also, it was 87 degrees in my shop. It was pretty darn hot before the forge got started, so forgive the grandpa socks and the grandpa shoes that I'm wearing, but I was just feeling pretty lazy. 27 rings in all. They're just about 24 inches in length once you put them all together. Now I'm going to make the spikes, and the spikes are just going to be 2-inch spikes. They're going to be very, very rudimentary. I barely touched them up after I got done with each of them. And I'll be honest with you, the other thing that I did, which is very unusual for me, is that I made the decision to not coat any of this metal with paint, with any sort of acrylic or polyurethane coating. I actually want this to rust. This is the first time I've ever done this. I actually want this to get very rusty in the elements and look very, very cool and very old. This is kind of fun, actually. Making a chain is kind of as fun. Putting it together, especially when you have different pieces like this, was enjoyable. It was rewarding for me. Now I'm going to start on the basket side, and I'm using 1.5 inch by 1/4 inch steel banding. Just going to make about a 15-inch circle, 15-inch in diameter circle. And then the bands that are going to go on the bottom, there will be 3 that go underneath to hold the basket. Those also are about 15 inches. I don't know what I would do without that swage block, that large piece of metal that you see me using to bend these forms. That thing has been such a godsend for what I tend to make. That's metal. That circle turned out pretty well for being completely handmade. Also, when I rivet these on, I was using these really large format rivets, which I love. I don't get to use them too often, but they just have this great archaic look to them. And then banding this together, clamping it together, making sure that it's true and that's perfectly perpendicular. And then I'm going to weld this up. I knew that I wanted something else to be hanging off the bottom of this. I just didn't want it to be a basket by itself. I wanted some Gothic looking something. I didn't know exactly what it would be. So I put a ring on there. And then now what I'm doing is I'm creating this 3-sided, I would call it sort of a double, triple ring. And I really don't know why my metal is burning. That's an odd thing. I haven't seen that done before. It's probably toxic coating of some sort. But this is going to be a triple ring where all of the other 3 long chains will come together at the top, and then it'll hang off of a bracket, which I'll fashion here in a second. It hangs pretty well. I like the way that looks. What I'm holding in my hands will end up becoming the bracket that I'll be making. Now I'm adding these rivets. There's going to be 12 rivets in the bands themselves just for aesthetic look. I welded them in. I didn't actually use mushroom them in like I should have, but that was just me being lazy. This old piece of railroad tie was going to be this doodad, this spike, this hook, whatever you might want to call it, that's going to dangle on the end of it. It just has sort of, a Gothic semi-weapon type look to it. It looked cool in the end. I like the way that it turned out. To me, it kind of ends up looking like something you would find on a church steeple or dangling off of the eaves of a Gothic building. This piece of metal was laying in a scrap pile at my metal distribution shop, and my friend Jeff is going to chew me out here. I didn't clamp down my metal. And even though that didn't look hard, that was pretty hard. So a reminder, which I shouldn't have to use to myself, and I did end up clamping this down again and again and again. Got to clamp the metal. I decided to try a new blade. It's called an indestructible blade. I actually bought 3 of them on a whim, and while they might be indestructible, they certainly do not cut very well, so that thing hit the bottom of a garbage can. Now I'm going to make the brackets or the face plates, the mounting plates that'll go on the end of that angled piece of metal that's going to hang this entire contraption off of. Again, giving them sort of almost a royal British crown look to them, each of these. I like the way they turned out. The last thing I needed to do was make a little bit of twists in some metal, give it kind of an ornate look to it, because it was going to be quite the combination of different pieces of metal, as you'll see here. The same metal shop that I got this bracket from, this angled piece of metal from, they also have a metal fabrication shop. So these pieces of metal, they're called cutoffs, and I use them. They give them to me. I'll use them for decorative thises and that's, and I just like the way they turn out, the way they can be used. They can be used on weapons. It saves me a bunch of cutting time, and it gives me lots and lots of ideas. Just sort of a decorative, Frankenstein-ish, Gothic, ornate piece of metal to hang the basket off of. Now, I couldn't figure out what to put in this, so I went to the local hardware store. They actually had flowers, and I decided to buy these flowers. The other choice would have been to make a bunch of logs and just burn something, but that would have probably burned down the shop. I really like the way this turned out. I really do. I'm very proud of it. It's going to hang out there outside of my shop just like that. I also like the sort of paradoxical look that it has. It's a brutish, gruesome Gothic basket that's going to have flowers in it for now, at least. Well, thank you for joining me for that build. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this build. I enjoyed the final product tremendously. It's a very curious thing, spiked chains. I don't quite understand why there's a need for them, but historically there's lots and lots and lots of spike chains of all sizes. There was actually, I believe, there is a completely legitimate historical account of the Ottoman ruler that conquered Constantinople and later then it became Istanbul. When he defeated Constantine, one of the things as a defensive measure that existed was across the Bosporus in one of the harbors, and I believe they have found portions of that chain or at least archaeological records of it, and I think that too was a spiked chain to sort of snare boats on that tried to come by it. Anyways, cool rabbit hole. There's not a lot of learnings on this project. Probably the only learning that I would have is if I'm going to do a spiked chain again, I would do it differently. I think the way that I made the rings and then had to shape them multiple times and then weld things into them, there's got to be a better way to do that. I do suspect that I'll make another spiked chain. The only other learning is it feels weird to me to be putting beautiful flowers within this Gothic basket. It feels a little girlified, a little girlificacious, a little femme forward, skirt centric, sissified. I would love to see this be some sort of hanging fire basket, like maybe like a brassiere, and not the type of brassiere that would be girlified. Either way, thank you for joining me for this project. I hope that you enjoyed it the way that I did. I don't know what I'm going to be making next week because next week I leave for a backpacking trip with some of my friends in Northern California, but perhaps I can bang something out pretty quick. Until then, God bless. Have a great week.